The group sat in silence as Diana explained, the tension in the area becoming more and more palpable with each passing second. They had only just started on this journey for the Dragon Balls. The third one that was in their possession now had cost them a fight with a god. And that was only to achieve one of them, not to mention the fact that the Dragon Balls were only capable of granting one wish. Apparently each of these Infinity Stones were worth a lot more. They had only known about the Space Stone from the King of Wakanda, but there were 5 more. Reality, Power, Time, Soul, and the Mind Stone, which they had now possessed. Apparently, if they were all combined, they could do quite literally anything. In other words, it was like the Dragon Balls, but without any cooldown time. The idea that these things were out there really weighed on them, especially people like Tony and Bulma. Those two were always on the lookout for new and different ways that the world was changing. Tony's father had built and revolutionized the world. His family was partially responsible for a lot of major innovations, including Captain America. Bulma's family had pioneered the Capsule Corporation, and due to their advancements in storage technology, they had managed to do incredible things, practically eliminating awful conditions for people in several nations overnight. The ability to quite literally carry a home in your pocket eliminated a lot of housing disparities. Not to mention the other things you could put in them like food or medicine, easily enough to feed 1,000 people. The two of them belonged to dynasties that had changed the world forever, and the Dragon Balls already seemed way out of their grasp. They were the discovery of the century, and they had real potential to do incredible things, but they were second fiddle to these things. And Tony and Bulma hadn't even heard of them until T'Chaka told them about the Space Stone forever ago. Somehow the idea that there were more out there never even crossed their minds. They didn't know how to feel. "And every stone is on Earth?" T'Challa asked. While he didn't know much about the stones as a whole, he did know that his father was very concerned about the existence of at least one of them. He doubted that his father would miss so many at once, and he seriously doubted that the others who had looked into it alongside his father could have. Half of Wakanda's science division was looking for the Space Stone alone. Diana shook her head. "As far as I know, that's not the case," she responded. "I don't know how many are out there, and I don't even know how they got here. The Amazons only noticed that there was an imbalance in the world, and that a great power was the cause of it." "Oh, well that's good information to know," Bulma said, sweat moving down her face. "The godlike warriors who exist in a hidden island somewhere noticed something that the best scientists in the world didn't, and they sent a kid to solve it." Diana bit her tongue. She couldn't exactly argue against their point, considering the fact that she had to beg just for her to be allowed outside Themysciran soil. The Amazons were still so against meddling in the rest of the world's affairs that they refused to even deal with the problem. No warnings were given or anything. If she wasn't here to help, chances were nobody would have even been here trying to deal with the issue. At least that's what she would have thought at first, but in meeting the people before her, her opinions changed. She had a feeling this group would have stumbled into the Infinity Stone sooner or later, but whether they would have been safe in doing so was another matter entirely. The stone seemed to attract power. This one was in the hands, or rather the skull, of a literal god, so she was almost positive that the other Infinity Stones on this planet were just as well guarded, that there were just as powerful creatures or groups who were using these stones for their own ends. Even with Diana's help, the group had barely won this fight. Who knew how they would have fared without her? She puffed up her chest, allowing her Amazon pride to flow through her. "I don't expect you to understand this, but I have to keep this stone." She clutched the Mind Stone, the stone that Goku had given her, in her palm, the glow of the stone barely escaping her clutches. If these stones fall into the hands of people who want to use their power, it would be catastrophic. Even if they were trying to use it for good, that's how dangerous they are. This is my responsibility. "I'd hate to say it, but I don't think it's your responsibility anymore," Sherry said. "At least not entirely." She pulled up a holographic display, allowing Diana to see it. It was an image of one of the Infinity Stones, the only one they knew of before this conversation, the Space Stone. It looked so real to Diana, who hadn't seen much of the world's advancements in the world, that she felt like she could almost reach out and touch it. "I believe our father has known of at least one of their existences for a very long time, and he's very interested in Wakanda gaining access to it, if only to lock it away. He shares your concerns about people using it for dark means, especially since it was used for dark means in the 1940s and yielded disastrous results then," she explained as she closed the display. Diana's eyes widened as she watched the display disappear like magic. Her mind also moved to the statement Sherry had just said. This stone was also used in that 1940s conflict. More and more in her mind, as more details rose to the surface about this war, she began to think that her people really should have been at least somewhat involved in it. Was their isolation truly so important if it meant leaving mankind to face this kind of threat alone? And what did it say about the world of man that they were capable of handling this kind of threat without them? Sherry continued. If anything, and I don't mean to be rude, given the Amazons' lack of existing in the world to the extent that nobody even thought they were real, Wakandans are really more the primary protectors of this planet. If our people find these stones, chances are they're going to make it their mission to protect them, and I'm sure that we're already on the track of the one that we know of. Diana found herself clenching her fist for a mere moment before releasing it. Causing a conflict here wasn't going to change anything, not to mention the fact that she doubted she would win one. The boy, Goku, who she fought earlier, was in more or less of a stalemate with her when it came to strength. She felt a smile coming on at that thought. Fighting with someone who was her equal, yet who treated fighting as more of a game than anything else, was surprisingly refreshing for her. Especially when the boy was as kind as the one before her. This Goku person just seemed genuine. He hadn't concealed an ounce of himself from the moment they met, instead meeting her head-on with his full emotional spectrum. If these were the people he surrounded himself with, she assumed they were likely the same way. That they were good, honest, and kind. Even more so for being willing to protect the world from the Infinity Stones. But she couldn't just leave her duty to somebody else. She couldn't just leave man's world to fend for itself like her forebears had done. If it was the job of the Amazons to protect man's world, then surely one of them should have to be out here to do it. I'm in no place to tell you guys that you can't do this yourselves. I understand that, but... Well, if you want, you can come with us, Goku said plainly. There wasn't a hint of hesitation behind his words. Everyone in his group shot a look at him. You've gotta be kidding me, Granola said. I have enough for you to babysit as it is. Not to mention the fact that we're looking for the Dragon Balls, not for these stones, Bulma added on. The thought of her even being near this one was making her break out in hives. Well, technically we weren't looking for the one we found, Shuri responded. And given that that stone was so close to a Dragon Ball, it's highly possible that the other stones are also close to them. Us running into another one of these stones seems almost inevitable, T'Challa continued. Having someone who knows more about them could be extremely useful. Kal-El scratched his cheek. The girl before him certainly seemed genuine, if anything else. And the fight they just had would have been a lot more difficult without her. He couldn't think of a single objection to her presence. But she was still an unknown in the grand scheme of things, and the last thing he wanted was to put the others in any kind of danger. He examined her as close as he could. He even used his enhanced hearing to listen to her heartbeat, and it never wavered an inch. Everything that she said, she believed in. Her heartbeat got a little quick whenever she talked about the people back home. Apparently something about it definitely made her anxious, but aside from that, she seemed perfectly friendly and trustworthy. At least at a glance, and Kal-El liked to see the best in others whenever he could. If we come across the other stones, we're going to have to try and get them, right? We can't let that kind of power run rampant. If Diana really wants to help with that, I don't see a reason we should stop her. Suddenly another voice broke out. Agreed, Tony Stark said, staring down at them. He was one of the first people who brought up objections to Diana keeping the stone, so the fact that he wasn't doing it now was something of a surprise. I know we're all freaked out, but none of us are just gonna let these things be out there, are we? Who knows what kind of catastrophe that would cause? Sure, we're not gonna go out of our way to find them. Wakanda seems to already have that handled, he said, looking at Shuri and T'Challa. But I doubt us finding a Dragon Ball and the stone in the same place was a coincidence. It's probably gonna happen again, and if it does, we're gonna have to go get it, and we'll need help. He reached a hand down to Diana, who was about half his height. It was awkward shaking hands with a kid like this, like having a business meeting with a 5-year-old. So, yeah, if you want to help and you promise to behave, then you can tag along. Promise to behave? Diana asked incredulously. In my defense, you did just break half a pyramid with your bare hands, Tony smiled. So how about it? Very well, Diana replied after a moment of silence. Tony gestured his hand forward to Diana again, and Diana just stared at it. What exactly am I supposed to do with your palm? Tony sighed, guiding Diana's hand towards his own. It's called a handshake. Out here, it's a bit of a binding agreement. Like an oath? Diana asked. Yeah, sure, something like that, Tony replied. And when he did, Diana's handshake got a lot more aggressive, more firm. Then let this moment mark my bond to your group. As long as your goals and mine align, you shall have my blade at your side, she nodded fiercely. Great, a child soldier, Bulma muttered to Tony under her breath. I'm sure this will go well. She glanced out the corner of her eye to Oolong, who was currently trying to slink away from them, and she grabbed at him from the back of his uniform. Hey, what the hell, lady? I helped you, against my better judgment, might I add, he shouted. Don't think I forgot about you saying you were trying to scam the whole town, Bulma said pointedly into his ear. Oh yeah, I nearly forgot about you, Granola narrowed his eyes at the pig, who sweated under his gaze. Tried it. That's it, he said, waving his hands in the air. It's not like I actually got anything. Because that makes it better. Granola rolled his eyes. If we let you run off, what are the odds you go and try and scam a town who won't have a god around? Bulma said, continuing to lift the pig by his ear. Only now doing it just the slightest bit harder. Ow, ow, this is what I get for helping you people, he said, beginning to flail around a bit. Oh yeah, because that response makes you more trustworthy. Granola hopped out. Oolong raised his eyebrows. I mean, yeah, I'll keep my nose clean. Promise, I'll even piggy swear. Whole new leaf from this point. You're lying, Kal-El responded immediately, making sweat pour down Oolong's face. Oh, come on, kid, how could you possibly know that? Have a little faith. Oolong smiled nervously. Your heart rate's spiking. Like a lot. Kal-El responded earnestly, not even fully aware of the weight his words were holding with the others. A human lie detector, you gotta be freaking kidding me, Oolong groaned. You know what? I'm gonna give you a way to live up to your words, Bulma said, narrowing her eyes at him. Looks like we got ourselves another tag-along. The Milano rocked out of deep space, slowly crawling into its descent as it entered the planet's atmosphere. It was a bit quicker of a descent than Peter Quill would have hoped for, though. He had experienced landing ships for basically his entire life, or at least the half of it that he had been off of Earth for. But most of those times when he did those landings, he had the engines on. But he just couldn't do that if he was dropping into Skrull space, especially not the Skrull homeworld. They would have picked him up in a second. Interstellar ships always gave off a lot of energy, whether they were jumping through space or not. It was part of the reason why they were so on edge ever since they crossed the border into Skrull territory. So this Hail Mary was a bit less of a controlled descent and more of a specific and very purposeful crash landing. One that he was pretty sure he could handle, though. That was if it wasn't for the fact that his rough landing skills had brought Gamora up from her rest, which also meant that she woke Raditz up, which meant that the two of them were currently screaming in his face, which was very, very distracting at the worst possible time. Damn it, Quill. I leave you alone for what, a few hours? Gamora asked angrily. Why are the engines off? Are you trying to get us killed? At this point, the increased gravity of them falling had begun to create fire streaks on the outer hull of the ship. In other words, the hull was increasing in temperature due to the planet's atmosphere. Something that the shielding of a ship normally helped, but at the moment... Quill, I'm going to ask you this question once, and the answer better not be what I think it is. Did you turn the shielding off, too? If I don't answer that question, does that count as me not giving you the answer you didn't want? Peter asked, a half smile tugging at his lips. Are all Terrans this stupid? She asked, reaching for the controls, only for her hand to be caught in place by Raditz. Raditz turned his head toward Peter. Between them both, Peter was definitely the better pilot. He had gotten them out of more than enough tight situations for Raditz to know that at this point, it was best to trust him when he made calls like this. At least at first. Peter, tell me we're not doing something dumb. Every option we had was dumb, Peter retorted. Alright, fine. Tell me we're not doing the dumbest thing we could be doing. Raditz replied. There was a moment of silence between him and Peter. Quill? Raditz said in a very warning tone. I don't just do stupid things, you know. Even without looking back at Raditz, Peter could already tell there was a bit of anger seeping up from him. This was the best of a bunch of bad options. It was either this or continue dodging Skrull patrols by ourselves for hours. Every second out there, they were picking up phantom trails from us, which meant that they were just going to keep searching for longer, so it was either this or drift aimlessly across space. And even then, they'd still find us because of life support, so yeah, I thought this through. The last words out of Peter's mouth were stern, a tone that he definitely wasn't known for using. Raditz sighed, getting into the seat aside from Peter and locking himself in as tight as he could. Gamora looked between the two of them. With the press of a button, she could turn everything back on, and probably steer them away from whatever hellhole this group of idiots was driving her into. But there was something in the back of her head that was basically screaming at her. A little voice that said, unfortunately, that they were probably right. And even though the front of her mind was practically screaming at her to take the controls away by force, the back of her mind won out. So she gritted her teeth and sat in the co-pilot seat. You're still an idiot, Quill, but fine, I won't touch the power, she said, grabbing a hold of the steering wheel and the landing controls. We stand a better chance if both of us are trying to control the ship at once. There are too many maneuvers for one person to make by themselves, she said flatly. Well, I'm not exactly used to having a co-pilot, but I guess I could make do, Peter replied. You damn well better, Gamora spat bitterly as the eyeline of the clouds broke. Below them, they could see the ground coming up. The environment of the area slowly began popping in, rendering like a simulation. Rather than the lush green trees that Peter Quill's home planet had, or the vast deserts that Raditz's had, this planet seemed to have a strange amalgamation of a climate they couldn't quite place. The rocks below were jarred up, almost looking like trees in the distance before they got closer and saw that they were like spikes protruding from the ground. Somehow the spikes didn't look jagged. They did at first, but as they got closer, they almost looked soft. Well, maybe not soft, but maybe malleable? Almost like if he had managed to crash into them, they wouldn't immediately dash their ships to pieces. More like these spikes would catch them. He didn't really want to take the risk, but at this point he kind of had to. It was either that or be smashed full force into the ground and probably crater their whole ship. But just in case his instincts weren't as good as he gave himself credit for, he turned to Raditz. Any chance you could use those superior Saiyan genes of yours to create a field for the ship? I would, but I'm kind of fresh out of superpowers at the moment. I keep telling you to learn Ki, Quill. Raditz snarled, already getting into position in the center of the cockpit, raising his hands as Ki pulled through his body. And I keep telling you I don't need to, because I have guns, and usually the ship's shield. They seem a lot easier to use than whatever magic flows through your body, Peter joked. Raditz sighed in annoyance as he let a surge of energy push throughout his body. The outside of the ship began to glow softly, the same color of Ki that Raditz normally had. As long as Peter didn't do something astronomically stupid, like detonate the ship upon impact, they should have been able to survive whatever came. At least according to Raditz's estimation, but it was still going to be a hell of a landing. And he'd have to try extra hard to make sure that the ship didn't collapse even if they did survive the landing. The last thing he wanted was to get stranded on another planet, especially when he had no idea where Quill wanted to strand them. Unfortunately, he didn't have time to be as careful as he wanted to be. Mere moments after his Ki shield was brought into existence, it was put to the test. The tall, spiky structures gave way almost immediately. Peter was right, the rock was somehow weirdly soft. Instead of cracking apart like a normal rock would, it bent and molded around their ship. Peter smiled at the blessing in disguise that he totally called. He gave himself major props for that in his head, as the ship skidded to the ground. It dug itself a couple of feet below, catapulting the planet's strange greenish-purple soil in every direction. It spun incredibly quickly, going into a violent tailspin until it finally came to a merciful stop, just stopping shy of a group of larger, much sharper rocks that congealed into a gigantic mountain. In other words, they thankfully came to a stop just before the landscape would have become very hard and very painful. Congratulations, Quill. We didn't die. Again. A small smirk spread across Raditz's face. As much as he hated the surprise of the moment, pulling off the impossible with Peter was always fun, and ever since joining him, it had become a very, very frequent thing. Of course we didn't die. You know my landings are always perfect, Peter said, slowly taking off his seatbelt, wincing slightly as he did so. The gear that he wore always protected his body pretty well, so that landing must have jerked him around a lot to bruise him. Thankfully, he was still nowhere near his limit, at least not yet, but Gamora grabbing him from his seat and pinning him up against the wall, that was starting to get to his limit. Assuming that somehow you were right and this is the best place to hide in the sector, where exactly is this gold mine of a hiding spot? He asked. Peter flinched slightly. He knew when he said it, it was going to make her very, very angry. And he knew he was a match for her in a one-on-one if he was ready for it, but he definitely wasn't right now. His head was still spinning. Not to mention the fact that she probably knew 3 different ways to break his arm from this distance before he could reach his gun. Well, let me put it this way, Peter responded shakily, using his best diplomatic voice. Where in scroll space would the scrolls be the least likely to search? They send their ships to every corner of the quadrant, Gamora responded pointedly. She knew everything about the scrolls that she possibly could, mostly due to her father's tutoring sessions. They were a very careful species, and incredibly isolationist. Scrolls didn't tolerate any kind of incursion on their space. They constantly patrolled every bit within their borders to make sure that nobody had managed to slip in. Well, yeah, sure, that's technically true. Except for one, Peter replied. Gamora narrowed her eyes at Peter. Except for one corner of the galaxy where the Skrulls wouldn't feel the need to send ships. Because they already knew they were safe. Because it was at the center of everything, and who would be stupid enough to set up shop there? Oh, hell, fuck you, Quill. She dropped into the ground. You absolute fucking moron. She ran her hands through her hair. He had landed them on Skrullos, the capital planet of the whole frickin' empire. Hey, you're the one who maneuvered us into scroll space. I'm just making the best of a bad situation. In what way is this the best of any situation? She asked. Well, excuse me, Miss Legendary Assassin, where would you have hid? He asked, Gamora being silent in response. Or would you have just kept running away? Because I guarantee at least one of those patrol ships would have caught us on our way out. And that would have led to a large-scale fight that we probably would have lost. He pushed himself to his feet. Gamora met his eyeline. She could feel herself biting down on her tongue. She hated more than anything that she didn't have a response. She tried to form one, but none came. It was like her tongue was betraying her. I know you might be Miss Mighty Warrior Lady, but I happen to be very good at hiding, so maybe trust an outlaw when it comes to evading the authorities, okay? She scoffed, silence once again hanging over the two of them. That was until Raditz finally cleared his throat. Will either one of you like to fill me in on why this location is so dangerous? Gamora pushed past him into the ship's main lounge area. Well, Peter called it a lounge area, but it was really just a bare steel circle with a couple of cushions put down. You tell him, Quill. I'm gonna go to the computers to make sure your little stunt actually did its job and we didn't attract attention. Assuming our long-range scanners still work. Just make sure to not set off any alarms, Peter replied, Gamora shooting him a death glare. I'll trust the outlaw not to get us caught by the authorities. You trust the assassin not to let people feel her presence. If people saw me coming, I wouldn't be a very good killer, now would I? She said, disappearing behind the door frame, not waiting for a response. I don't know, Peter muttered. I feel like you'd still get the job done. Vegeta sat quietly at the edge of the ship. Anissa crouched beside him. Both of them were waiting for their moment as the Skrull capital city slowly began to drop into view. Vegeta hid the slightest of smirks. He was right. He didn't have to convince Qui all that hard. The conversation with him had maybe lasted 2 or 3 minutes. The second Vegeta had mentioned the capital city of Skrullos would be the most difficult place to make fall, which in all likelihood would mean that the person who did manage to conquer it would get credit and move up in the Frieza Empire. And Qui was practically chomping at the bit to do it. In fact, Qui, after Vegeta had mentioned this, had tried to convince Vegeta to go on a rudimentary scouting mission away from the target point. In other words, he was trying to redirect him as far away from the prime target as possible. Vegeta very agreeably decided to. He told Qui that he was going to move around the outskirts with Anissa. In other words, exactly where Vegeta wanted to be in the first place. He was mostly sure he would be able to take out the side defenses quickly, especially with Anissa helping him. Nappa would, unfortunately, be in Qui's company when they landed, but he would slip away from his group relatively quickly. You haven't said anything in a moment. Are you nervous? Anissa asked, blankly kicking her feet into the air. That better not be your way of telling me that you are, Vegeta responded, a slight air of confidence about his voice. Of course not. I'm the Viltrumite. We don't get nervous. We aren't allowed to, she said, shuffling herself to the edge of the ship's door, roughly an inch from dropping off the side. They were getting closer to the city. The small dot was coming clearer and clearer into focus. The city's lights were dotting into view over the skyline. The technology they managed to scrounge up to keep their ship hidden wouldn't last for much longer. Realistically, the Skrulls should have detected them the second they dropped into the atmosphere. Fortunately, the Frieza Force wasn't entirely stupid when it came to matters of technology. They understood the purpose of a cloaking device. And, due to Vegeta's presence, there was somebody smart enough on board the ship to use it. They had likely 500 more feet before it would cease to be effective. A fact that Vegeta purposely neglected to share, since at that point they would have been departing anyway. We would have to hope that his so-called superiority would carry him through a crash landing. Sure, Nappa would be caught up in the blast too, but Vegeta wasn't worried about that. Nappa was more than strong enough to handle it. How long do you think Qui's going to survive for? Anissa asked absent-mindedly. Against the more advanced Super Skrulls, I'd give him, I don't know, an hour or 2? He seems very much like the type who would underestimate such a dangerous enemy. I'd say he'd last 3 to 4, Vegeta responded. In that case, you're giving him a lot more credit than I would. And here I thought you thought Qui was useless. She turned to him, smirking, Vegeta sharing the same look on his face. He's incredibly useless. He's just not that useless. He's just useless enough to fail while still buying us time. And he'll likely take out a handful of Skrulls with him. Not to mention the fact that I'm sure he'll use his lackeys as bodyguards, which should buy him even more time. Vegeta responded. I'm sure they'll be regretting letting Qui be their boss soon enough. Anissa laughed. She saw Vegeta getting into his ready position. If she had to guess, they had a few more seconds before drop-off. This was going to be the biggest thing they had ever done together. They had conquered worlds before, but Vegeta, due to his nature as a Saiyan protector, always resisted that as much as possible. Not to mention the fact that in those times they were always working under one of Frieza's people. Either that or Nolan, which was much worse. Even though she and Vegeta were allied to each other, they still had to fulfill other directives if they wanted to move up the ladder. This would be them going off on their own plan, completely disconnected from the others, fulfilling their own mission and operating by their own objectives. And if they actually came out on top, they would be catapulted through the rankings. It was the kind of thing that she would never do with another Viltrumite. Viltrumites were built on order. They were built on strength. Their whole society revolved around it. In other words, doing something out of the ordinary like this, something without the express consent of those higher up, well, it simply wasn't going to happen. This was the kind of thing that could only be done with someone you trusted, and she was sure that at this point, Vegeta trusted her. She was probably the first Viltrumite in 1,000 years to have had that feeling, to have felt the trust that another person had in her, and she most certainly didn't hate it. The two of them dived off the side of the ship together, the wind pushing by their hair in an instant. Vegeta gestured to a guard tower and Anissa nodded, accelerating in that direction, her skin partially igniting from the pressure of the atmosphere, and she divided the tower in half with her body. The two halves of it fell to the ground. Any average Skrull would have more than likely been able to survive it. What they wouldn't be able to survive, though, were the two ki blasts that came from Vegeta's palms, that completely incinerated them. The tower, the bodies within them, everything. The blasts were controlled enough that Vegeta doubted they could be seen from a long way away, which likely meant that nobody inside the city would know that their reinforcements were being taken out. Vegeta and Anissa landed on the ground next to each other, a wave of light washing over them from a nearby ki explosion. "I can see Kui made his entrance known," Vegeta scoffed. "I don't believe someone like Kui is attuned to the concept of subtlety," Anissa responded, squinting into the distance. The glow from the ki blast that Kui unleashed filled her eyes. The orb must have encompassed about 100 feet in diameter. She was surprised it didn't go bigger. Kui wasn't exactly one to restrain himself. "No one who works for Frieza understands subtlety," Vegeta spat. "On the positive side of things appear to be going to plan. I'd say we have about 10 minutes before all of the city is directly on top of him. As long as we take care of everything aside from the capital in the meantime, they should be weakened by the ordeal." "Should we split up?" Anissa asked. Vegeta shook his head. "As sure as I am that we can take on the Skrulls in a head-on-head confrontation, there's still the possibility that they could overwhelm us. The last thing we need is one of us dying out here in a preventable way." Anissa furrowed her brow. She had never known Vegeta to be someone with a great self-preservation instinct. Sure, he hadn't died, and he certainly had no plans to, but he still wasn't the one to make the cautious move if he could avoid it. That was, unless it came to Nappa. Vegeta often had trouble allowing himself to put Nappa into a circumstance that could be more than he could handle. And when he did make that decision, he normally thought through every possible variable. Likely because they were as close to family as two people could be in the Frieza Force, and considering the fate of the Saiyans, Nappa was probably the closest thing Vegeta had to family in general. She couldn't help but wonder if Vegeta was doing the same thing here. She shook her head. That would be stupid of her to assume. While Vegeta treated her with respect, she was still a Viltrumite, but she was one who had sworn loyalty to him. True loyalty. Perhaps that was something that went both ways. "Alright, so we move in a duo and make our way around." She nodded slowly. "According to the map you showed us, the next Skrull base is roughly 400 feet in that direction. If I keep hitting them low and you keep hitting them high, we should be able to be well done with this task by the time Kui falls, based on your estimation." "That seems reasonable. I trust that you're ready to move forward." Vegeta turned to her. Anissa nodded firmly in response to that question. She had never really been part of a unit like this. She had been working with Vegeta for years, and she was only just now starting to figure out what it meant. She found herself realizing that she didn't want to fail this mission, not for the usual Viltrumite reasons. She didn't fear judgment from somebody overhead, and she didn't fear the inevitable beating that came with running away from a task. She wanted to complete this mission simply because winning would mean that her team won as well, and she wanted to bring them a win. She hadn't had the chance to stop and realize just how much being around Vegeta had changed her, but to her surprise, she was fine with it. Gamora furrowed her brow deeply at the display before her. She had put quite a bit of work into picking up all the chatter on the planet. Every ship, every fortification, every individual soldier within a 1,000-mile radius was having their signals funneled to her ship. It had created a rather large map that was accurate down to the square foot. She knew where everything was going, what their information was, if they had seen anything unusual. Like them, for example, but they hadn't, and she was satisfied with that. Quill's gambit was foolish and unbelievably reckless, but at the end of the day it worked. They didn't pick up their ship entering on orbit. She was actually starting to become content with taking his suggestion, with just sitting down in the ship and trying to relax and let this moment pass by them, leaving when they finally had the time to take a proper plan of action. But the universe seemed to have a vendetta against her and the possibility of relaxing. Slowly, bit by bit, her meticulously crafted grid fell apart. Pieces of it disappeared, and pieces of it fell after that, and after that, and after that. Slowly, one by one, more than half of the display was just gone. She hunched over the table, trying desperately to re-find the signals, but she couldn't. She thought for a second that they had noticed her and were trying to hide themselves, but that clearly wasn't the case. If it was, all of the signals would have disappeared, instead of just some of them, meaning something was out there taking out different scroll installations. In other words, "Quill! Raditz! Get your asses in here!" She ordered, the two of them following suit within mere moments of the shout. She gestured down to the table and looked up at them, fear screaming onto her face. "The planet's under attack. You landed us here in the middle of a goddamn invasion!" She shouted, ruffling her hands through her hair furiously. Peter looked down at the holographic display on the table. "Oh, perfect timing then," Peter shrugged as she looked at him. "Perfect timing? Are you insane? Do you even know what kind of danger we're in? A full military force coming down here will..." Gamora began. A full military force from any major empire would have already crushed these guys. It would have been instant. It looks like they're taking a pretty long time to just get through this pattern, like they're going one by one, with a main force trying to break hell loose in the capital, but those guys look like they're getting their asses kicked considering most of that grid's still up and running. "In other words, you think it's a guerrilla unit," Gamora remarked. "Yeah, probably," Peter shrugged. "It's probably not more than just like a couple of people. But if they're pretty strong people, then they might actually be able to do enough damage to the planet that we're just never going to be found. Like I said, perfect timing." "That's if they're strong, Peter," Raditz remarked. "If these people were to get crushed instantaneously, the scrolls would start combing every inch of the planet for stragglers, and then we'd be found almost immediately." "Always Mr. Glass half empty, aren't you?" Peter responded. "I tried to learn from personal experience." Raditz gave a wry smile. "Can we get a look at these people? If we know what empire they're from, we might have a good idea what their fighting capabilities are. I might be able to catch an image from one of the cameras before they go down. Give me a second." Gamora replied. It didn't take her as long as she initially thought it would. An image filled the screen of the assailants in mere moments. From the looks of things, a Viltrumite girl and a Saiyan boy, with a very distinctive hairstyle. "Vegeta?" Raditz said, stunned, a chill moving through his body. "Wait, that's Vegeta?" Peter tilted his head at the image. "Like the guy who helped you escape from the Frieza Force, Vegeta? That's awesome, man. That means he's a friend." "Maybe." Raditz swallowed hard. "What do you mean, maybe?" Peter questioned. "Wasn't this guy like your noble leader or something? This is a big reunion moment. Why aren't you happy?" "He helped me escape, but he stayed." Raditz gripped his arm, his vision going blurry. "He stayed behind, forced to be in their military. He's been taking orders from their people for years, probably with a boot on his neck. I respect Vegeta a great deal. It's possible he got away on his own, I don't know, but if he's not here of his own volition, then there's a chance that he's here under the orders of Frieza. And if Frieza's here..." The more he thought about it, the more it seemed likely. After all, there was a Viltrumite girl on the camera. If anybody detested the Viltrumite species, it was Vegeta. There was no way he could imagine that Vegeta would work with one, even if he had to, unless it was under the threat of death. Peter put a hand on Raditz's shoulder. He flinched for a moment before settling down. "Look, man, no matter who's here, nobody's gonna hurt you. You don't understand what Frieza is, Quill. You don't know who we're dealing with," Raditz replied. "If Frieza's out there..." Raditz trailed off. Peter looked at him in silence for a moment. "Good point," Peter replied, drawing his guns out as he walked toward the door. "Where the hell are you going?" Both Raditz and Gamora shouted, the latter grabbing Peter by the arm. "I'm gonna go ask the Prince of All Saiyans some questions. What does it look like I'm doing?" "If you're caught..." "We don't know what will happen if I'm caught. Either this Frieza guy is here, or he's not. Either Vegeta's working by himself or with somebody else. We could sit here forever and wait for the outcome based on crap we don't know. Or we could go out there and start getting some information. Maybe even rescue Raditz's buddy from slavery? I'm assuming it's slavery." "Quill!" Gamora shouted. "Alright, look, let's put it this way. If you want to be reasonable, let's be reasonable. There's about a 50-50 chance of this situation either being perfectly fine or it getting a lot worse. And that all depends on whether Prince of All Saiyans out there is going to win or lose this fight. So, isn't it in our best interest to see which outcome will happen? Or maybe perhaps provide assistance to the outcome that, benefits us?" Gamora took a deep breath, staring at Peter for a moment, before silently walking by him, pushing him out of the way. I think I'm getting somewhere with her. She didn't punch me this time, that's progress," Peter remarked, at Raditz's still blank expression. "Hey man, if you don't want to do this, we don't have to. I just figured..." "No, you're right, Quill," Raditz replied, walking down to the surface side by side with his friend. Bardock crouched over the remnants of the facility that they had just trounced through, over the hordes of enemy shoulders that had just been bested. Half of the structures that they were underneath had completely collapsed, mostly thanks to Muesli's pinpoint shots. And most of the weapons that the people who attacked them held were on the ground, mostly because Gine had managed to disarm them almost immediately. All in all, the whole ordeal probably taken them only 20 minutes, but the 20 minutes hadn't exactly been pleasant. These Hydra bases, or Red Ribbon, whichever they wanted to call themselves now, were so hidden and out of sight that they barely knew the general direction of where they were. Even though Muesli had managed to pretty much pinpoint them, they still spent hours wandering around. And when they had managed to find the places that they were looking for, they had a couple of surprises in store. No real fights so far, nothing like the machine that had ambushed them in the Arctic. But there were strange traps, explosions that had enough energy to harm them in the form of landmines. Walls that closed in with enough force to dent Bardock's Saiyan armor. Self-destruction mechanisms that seemed to delay just long enough for Bardock to reach them, almost like they were testing his speed. It was inconvenience after inconvenience, and as a result, they had only managed to get through 2 of these places. 2 out of the probably hundreds that Muesli had spotted on the radar. Let me guess, there's nothing here? Bardock said, glancing at the others as he kicked a rock so hard that it pile-drived through what was left of a wall. Nothing I can see, Ine responded. She didn't really know what to look for. When it came to technology, Muesli was the one who was really handling that. So Gine tried to look through physical media more than anything else, and she looked through what little files hadn't been burned, but there wasn't enough to catch any context. From what she could tell, they seemed to be schematics, pieces of blueprints of machines that she couldn't even begin to understand. The only things that drew her attention were a couple of repeated names, someone by the name of Jojo and another person by the name of Wheelo. Actually, I think I might have found something, Muesli pondered aloud, catching the attention of the others. It's in a computer that's perfectly intact, even when they went through and purged everything. Looks like somehow they completely missed it. Lucky break, Bardock replied. I don't think we've ever gotten that lucky, Muesli replied, Bardock tilting his head in response. From the looks of things, it says it's a research lab. If we manage to find our way over there, we get a lot of information about the robot who attacked us before. We might even find the thing. Maybe even information on where they keep the stone. It's pretty much perfect for what we're looking for, and that seems too perfect. You mean like a trap? Ine replied. If that's the case, we should exercise a lot of caution here. If something happens to us, the kids... We'll be fine. Especially because we'll be fine. We haven't met anything on this planet we haven't been able to break yet, have we? Well, no, I suppose not, Ine replied. So where is this lucky break anyway? Bardock asked. Muesli narrowed her eyes at the screen. It looks like a place in the United States, a location by the name of New York City? Huh, Bardock replied. You remember King T'Chaka saying that he was going to go there for a little bit in order to follow up on a lead on Hydra. It looked like they were going to meet up with His Highness sooner than they thought. Hey everybody, it's really awesome to see you guys again, and thank you guys so much for turning out. Before I keep going with the outro, I just want to say a really quick Happy Pride Month to all of you. It's super important to be yourself, and I really hope you guys are able to do that with those you love. I really hope you guys enjoyed the video. We got to see the invasion of Skrullos for the first time. And pretty soon we're going to be getting to cool fights with the Super Skrulls. Not to mention the fact that Diana has finally joined up with the Z-Fighters, and I really look forward to exploring her dynamic with them. This series has been a ton of fun for me so far, so thanks again for turning out for it. I love the fact that there are people out there entertained by my stories, and I'm happy if I managed to bring a smile to at least one of your faces. So, if you liked the video, please feel free to let me know by leaving a like, and be sure to subscribe so you don't miss out on the future of this or any other series that I produce. Until next time, I've been your captain, and it's been a joy to take you on another tour of the strongest Earth in the multiverse. I'll see you all next time. Bye!